had the opportunity to come down to the Capitol several times before to talk about testing and other issues related to education. And I want to start off by sincerely thanking the members who are here just for your time to listen, the time to study these issues, to reflect upon these issues, because I think we all recognize that they're complex. They're not as simple as you'll read in the paper. There are layers to all of these issues that are talked about here at the legislature, and I know I appreciate just the time to process through that. My remarks today are related to the Common Core state standards from a principal's point of view, from a practitioner, somebody who has worked with middle school students for the last 20 years, and someone who interacts with these students on a daily basis. Someone who is also my building test coordinator. So I'm very familiar with the logistics, the impact of state testing, and all of those areas as well. And I know that we had some questions about those this morning, and I'm going to address some of those issues as they relate to the Common Core state standards this morning. If you look at the slide, and I assume you can see it on here, the Common Core state standards on the surface seem like a reasonable thing. A set of common standards that will allow students in different parts of the state, different parts of the country, to have a general framework of what they should know and be able to do at different levels throughout their education. My problem with the Common Core state standard is it's been hijacked. And I use the analogy of the tree because the seeds for this tree were not planted by Oklahomans. They were planted by people at the federal level, whether it's within the federal government or national entities who seek to change the face of public education. And they're using the Common Core state standards as a tool to help promote the reforms that they're interested in. Because you can take a tree like this, and if you start hanging things to it, excessive testing, A to F report cards, third grade retention, TLE, in particular the quantitative measures that are related to state testing. Remediation and the funding needed for that. I have to look at my notes with my glasses. Narrow curriculum. Narrow curriculum. The rest of the slides are bigger. Loss of engagement among our students. And then finally, the loss of teacher autonomy, which I'm going to talk to you today, and what the role of a teacher in a classroom is, and how Common Core affects that role. Here's what happens when you put too many things on the tree. It falls over by its sheer weight. And I sense that Common Core may have a similar fate because of all the things that are being added to this tree that we call the Common Core state standards. The sheer weight of this will come falling back on the people. I want to say one thing just because I know that the climate right now, whether it's Oklahoma politics or federal politics, is far too acrimonious. And I come here today trying to be a voice, to share my perspective, and I understand that from the representatives' points of view, from the parents, the students behind me, we all bring a perspective to this table. And we really have to get past these partisan issues, we get past the arguments, and really start to focus on what is in the best interest of the children of Oklahoma. Some of these things that get thrown back when we complain or provide constructive criticism to some of these reforms are not true. Administrators, superintendents, principals are not opposed to accountability. I'm accountable every single day to my school board, to my district leaders, to my parents and the patrons of our community when the food just walked in, to our teachers, to our students, to myself, to bring the very best I can every single day. Our teachers are not opposed to evaluation. They want to be the best teachers they can be. So they're not opposed to having an evaluation system that is designed to provide them feedback to better their craft. They are opposed when you start attaching quantitative measures that may or may not be reflective of their skill as an educator. Parents are not opposed to standards or assessments. I think the parents you talked to this morning or heard from this morning are not opposed to having high expectations for their child. What they're opposed to is a one-size-fits-all expectation for all the children. They know that assessments are an important tool for diagnosing where their child is and where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are. And students enjoy learning. It's a human trait. It's innate in all of us, that desire to learn. But not all students like school. Why is that? Those are some of the questions we need to ask. But most of all, students want to be valued as individuals. I'm going to touch on this theme throughout. Problems with Common Core state standards. I'm going to go through 8 of these fairly quickly. This cartoon shows a teacher. Common Core state standard apple has been dropped on the desk. Do you know anything about teaching and what is that term somebody called experts? You may have already heard this morning or read about this, but the Common Core state standards were not state-led. That's a myth. They were developed under the auspices of the National Governors Association, Achieve, which is a corporation, ACT, the College Board, and for the most part, university professors. Of the original committees for English, Language Arts, and Math, they had 15 primary authors, 35 members. They were part of the feedback group. Each of these individuals had to sign a confidentiality agreement that nothing that was talked about in those meetings would travel outside of that meeting room. 5 people did most of the writing. David Coleman, who is now the head of College Board, writing the new SATs, and Susan Pimental. Those 2 people and the 3 for math did most of the drafting of the initial Common Core standards. Very few teachers have been involved up to this point. Only one math teacher was part of the original focus group. He dropped off after a short period of time. To be clear, with the adoption of Common Core state standards in the state of Oklahoma, we have seen more input on the part of teachers in drafting those Oklahoma academic standards, in basically unpackaging what the Common Core state standards are and adapting them for Oklahoma. But it's been minimal. Common Core state standards are pretty well set. The issue with this is that we have about 50 people who are creating standards for 50 million students. These standards might be the best thing since 2-ply toilet paper. They might also be a disaster. They haven't been tested. They haven't been piloted in any state. We're doing an experiment, in essence, with 50 million children, an entire generation of students. What happens if it doesn't work? Second point, Common Core state standards are not a magic pill. It's a prescription for a disease that doesn't exist. I don't have high blood pressure, so I don't take high blood pressure medicine. If I did, it probably wouldn't hurt me, but it wouldn't help me either, because there's not an issue there to solve. We've been doing this in education for the last 30 or 40 years, searching for that magic pill. What's going to cure those things that ail public education? Much like many people search for a cure for weight issues. And you've probably seen the ads for lipozene. guaranteed to lose weight. All you have to do is take this pill and you will lose 30 pounds in 30 days. In fact, there's a warning on the box that says if you start losing weight too fast, you should stop using it. Results may vary, which means it's going to vary from person to person. One person may lose 30 pounds. One person may gain 10. But the bottom line in the fine print on this box, it says combined with diet and exercise. So if you take anything, I could sell water. When combined with diet and exercise will cause us to lose weight. So we need to stop searching for this magic pill, because here are some of the things that we're looking at. Common Core State Standards, it's just the most recent magic pill. Teacher and school accountability. Since No Child Left Behind, No Race to the Top, we have TLE, we have A to F report cards. These things haven't made a difference in teaching and learning in our schools. I know that this spring there will be bills about merit pay or incentive pay. And I would encourage the representatives who are here to vote no. Merit pay has failed in every place it's been tried in schools. New York City just spent $78 million and dropped it. Tennessee spent over $120 million and it failed. Florida spent over $100 million and it failed. Chicago spent millions of dollars and it failed. It fails everywhere. And from someone who works with teachers every day, I can tell you that the biggest benefit we have in a school is the teamwork and collaboration of the professionals in that building. When you start introducing merit pay or incentive pay, you destroy that culture. It would be one of the most destructive things we could ever do for our schools in Oklahoma. School choice, charters and vouchers, that's a whole different issue. Bottom thing, is a pill necessary? Or do we feel like we just have to have a pill to make people feel better? A placebo. Because we've generated this narrative that schools are failing. Well, what's wrong with all these solutions? They're based on an exaggeration of the problem, a misdiagnosis of the causes, and a simplistic prescription. Common Core is a simplistic prescription that often does more harm than good. Institutions tend to preserve the problem for which they're the solution. That's why we have this strange dichotomy going on in our state and nation now, where you have people from across the aisle who are coming together for different issues, but they each have unique agendas. Education reform is one of those issues. Both sides want to preserve this narrative that public schools are failing because they believe they have the solution. So on one side, you've got groups that are espousing the virtues of charter schools and vouchers and privatization and parent choice. And on the other side, you've got groups that are asking for more funding for teachers, more funding for remediation programs. But imagine if there wasn't that narrative that public schools were failing. What happens to the solutions? There's no need for them. A couple of years ago, President Obama came out with this statement: our generation's Sputnik moment is back. Our country is in serious danger of falling behind. Arnie Duncan followed that up with, for me, it's a massive wake-up call. What were they talking about? They were talking about this: the release of the 2009 PISA results of the Program for International Student Assessment. And in the middle, I know that people behind me can't see that, you'll see the United States, almost smack dab in the middle, and 15th, with a score of 500. The top schools, or the top nations, Shanghai, China, which last time I checked wasn't a country, but then Finland, you've heard all of those stories. Well, here's what you don't see. This data, which is included in the executive summary that President Obama may read, this is like a 30,000-foot snapshot from which people make generalizations about the value of this data. Instead of actually going to the surface, we're actually drilling down into this data to see what it really means, to make valid comparisons from one country's data to another. Because if they did that, here's what they'd find out. If you compare, this may not be politically correct to say, but if you compare ethnicities. So if we look at just Caucasian students in the United States of America compared to Caucasian students everywhere else in the world, ours are number 2, behind only Finland. And Finland is 99% Caucasian and has a very restrictive immigration policy because they want to keep it that way. If you have an Asian student, the number 1 place in the world for you to get an education, for your child to get an education, is the United States of America. Asian American students outperform Asians in Asian countries like Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, China in general. The only country is Shanghai, China. And that's because they recruit students to those schools because of their test scores. Hispanic Latino students in our country are the highest ranked students in the world, outperforming Latin America, Central America, South America. And then African American students, for what comparisons there are, first in the world. That doesn't sound like a narrative that things are that bad. Well, let's look at it from another perspective. Let's look at it by poverty. If we simply look at schools in the United States who participated in the PISA result, and we look at schools that are less than 10% poverty, the average PISA score was 551. And then you can see down the chart, 10 to 24%, 527, 25 to 49.9, 502. And you see what happens when you get to schools above 50% poverty rates. The scores plummet. So now let's make a comparison of what those schools, the US schools with less than 10% poverty, compared to those schools in other countries with less than 10% poverty, and the United States outperforms the world. That's data that you don't see. But again, it doesn't feed the narrative that public schools are failing. What's the reason for American students' relatively low performance? Poverty and lack of resources. Now I know some will say, well, you're just using poverty as an excuse. I'm not. Poverty does not dictate the outcome of a child's life. It doesn't cause them to underachieve. But the research is inarguable that there is a correlation between high poverty and low achievement. So until we as a state and as a nation start to address the real issues associated with poverty in our homes, nothing else we're going to do is going to make a significant impact. School improvement is people. For those of you who are older in here, you might remember the movie Soylent Green. Anybody there? A couple of you. That's where our focus needs to be. Building capacity in our schools, with our teachers, providing the kind of professional development, the kind of compensation that we need to bring the best and brightest to the field of education. That's how we make the difference. Not by more standards, not by more testing, not by all these other things that we're trying to do. It always comes back to people, not programs, not processes. Here's the third reason. This is hard to see again behind me, but what's happening in this picture is the student on the left-hand side is a pole vaulter, and we're cutting his pole in half at the same time we're raising the bar that we expect him to jump over. That's what's happening in education today. Per pupil funding in the state of Oklahoma is below 2009 levels. We've got more students, and now we have higher expectations. More things that we're expected to do. So the bar is raising while we're cutting resources. That is not a recipe for success. Lack of teacher training. For the last couple of years, teachers have been in the bullseye. They've been denigrated by the people in the national reform movement who like to blame teachers in schools for all that ails public education. And now come along the Common Core state standards, and we want them to adopt them with fidelity because this is going to be good for them. But at the same time, we tell them, if your students don't do well, this is a good picture for Oklahoma. You've got the teacher and the deer on the side of the road, not sure when to cross. Not sure if they're going to make it to the other side or whether they're going to get hit by a semi about what it costs. This one's important to me. Standards shouldn't be attached to school subjects, but to the qualities of mind it's hoped the study of school subjects promotes. We'll talk about that one a little bit. What I'm trying to get at is that instead of having standards for English language arts and for math, we need to develop standards that are based on those qualities of the mind that are important for 21st century learners. We all agree that the ability to read, to write, to communicate, to problem solve, to think creatively are all important. But so are the things that are up here: empathy, self-discipline, a sense of humor, a passion for learning, tenacity, responsibility. There is no test to measure these intangible qualities within students. And by forcing them to take a test that measures only one or two aspects of that, we're telling them that the rest of those things aren't as important. Here's a big one. Common Core State, Common Core Standards will increase testing. And the gentleman from Broken Arrow today did a very nice job of explaining the impact of testing. Last year at Jenks Middle School, we gave 7,624 individual tests. 820 counseling hours were used. I have 3 counselors who spend almost 6 weeks doing nothing else but facilitating testing. And I've got 7 other individuals who help with that process. It is an all-hands-on-deck process, and it disrupts our instruction for 5 weeks, plus a week before and a week after for the technology setup and tear down. So in essence, if you're a student and you've got some counseling issues in the month of April, just write them down and come back to us in May, because we don't have time to deal with those right now. An 8th grade student at Jenks Middle School this year will take district benchmark tests each quarter in social studies, math, language arts, and science, explore tests in 4 different subjects, the writing OCCT, paper OCCTs in science and U.S. history, the online OCCTs in math and reading, and EOI exams in algebra, geometry, algebra 2. 70% of our 8th graders are in one of those EOI courses, so they take that. On average, between 9 and 12 hours of testing. When we test university graduates for medical school, they take the MCAT in 4.5 hours. So why does it take us 3 times as much time to determine whether an 8th grader is ready to go to high school as it does to determine whether someone's ready to go to medical school? This is difficult. Again, it's got too many details on it, but I know you can see it up there. For the parents behind me, if you're not aware of some of this testing information, it's out there. Look at what's going to happen with the implementation of the Common Core State testing, which is called Oklahoma Academic Standards, and the catchy name our State Department came up with was the OCRA exams, Oklahoma College and Career Readiness Assessment. For those of you who read my blog, you know I came up with another one for that, another acronym. But if you read across 7th grade, the first 2 lines, this year, 7th graders will take approximately 210 minutes of testing. Geography, reading, and math. Next year, they'll take 450 minutes, an increase of 4 hours of testing. Over 100% more than what they're taking now. So now instead of just taking one 90-minute reading test, they're going to have 3.5 hours of language arts and writing combined. Instead of one 60-minute math test, they're going to take 2 90-minute math tests. Now, I've talked to a lot of math teachers. I cannot understand why it takes 3 hours to determine whether an 8th grader has competency in pre-algebra. Most of my math teachers could do it in 10 questions in about 20 minutes. Look what happens in 8th grade. 8th grade is already our most tested year because we have writing tests and U.S. history. But still, we found a way to add 180 minutes, almost 3 hours of testing and this is for 2015, if everything goes through. We haven't heard all the details yet, but this is based on the RFP that the State Department of Education put out for the testing companies, which I suspect will be CTV McGraw-Hill. We'll get this contract. We'll find out very soon. That's a big issue. We can't do it. Right now, this stretches my capacity in a school. We will have to extend the testing window longer than it already is, lose more instructional time just to take more testing that has no value. These are tests of learning. We don't even get the results of these in our building until the next year when those students are gone. These have little to no value for educators in the classroom. Plus, standardized tests are simply a terrible way to measure the potential of a human being because we're not standardized. We're different. And you've heard that message throughout the speakers this morning.
I have a question, if we could pause right there.
Yes.
Ms. Kern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These tests, how many of these tests are mandated by the federal government and how many of them are by the state?
Okay. By the federal government, and No Child Left Behind, which now the waiver testing is still the same. Grades 3 through 8, every student must be tested in math and reading every year. Then in grades 10 through 12, they have to be tested once in math and reading. So they could be algebra, geometry, and then English test. Then they also have to be tested in science one time, grades 3 through 5, then 6 through 9, and then 10 through 12.
I understand all that. What I mean is if some of these or most of them are federally mandated, we can't do anything about that. If the tests you say that they're being required to take that have no value are state mandated, I want to know that. Those are the tests we can deal with.
The writing component is not required by federal law. That could be eliminated. The social studies requirements are state law, not federal law. Those can be eliminated. All the rest of the EOIs can be eliminated. So there is quite a bit we can do. Plus, it's just a matter of looking. Even if there is a math and reading test mandated by the federal government, they don't tell us we have to do a 3.5-hour language arts test or a 3-hour math test. Those are state decisions, and that's excessive. This goes all the way down to 3rd grade, by the way. So those of you who have 8-year-olds that are studying for that reading test, they're going to be taking a 3.5-hour reading, language arts, and writing test that will determine whether they move on to 4th grade. There won't be any stress or pressure there. Common Core, kill innovation. Notice all the brown cows in there. Welcome to the Common Corral. When the Common Core becomes the only game in town, it's the only game in town. So what will some of these schools that used to be innovative and try things like project-based learning and standards-based curriculum and allowing students to find their passion and learn through those areas of interest are now going to be focused into a very narrow field, a corral, so to speak, so they're all the same. And this is what we're telling students. Here's your path to college and career readiness, down this narrow tunnel to that blue door. And that's the only way. That's a false message. Albert Einstein said it well a long time ago. It's a miracle that curiosity survives formal education. I see it with middle schoolers. And I know our elementary teachers or parents who are back here, when their kids are young, kindergarten, 1st grade, they love school. They love to learn. They should. And they should still love to learn when they come 7th and 8th grade. But somehow, formal education kills that for a lot of students. Somebody mentioned this earlier. Common Core may set performance standards, which is fine. Everybody knows that, okay, to reach this level, you got to be here. Standard also means like everybody else. That's not what we want. We don't want a set of standards that cause every student to have to be the same, to learn the same things in the same order at the same time based on chronological age, when everything we know about research says that that's wrong. Yet we're doing it anyway. Albert Einstein, again, believed in standardizing automobiles, not human beings. Standardization is a great peril which threatens American culture. Said that a long time ago. Somebody, I think Linda from Sand Springs, had a kind of a square peg analogy. 80% of our students are going to be fine with Common Core state standards. They're going to be the round peg. They're the compliant ones. They'll do what they're expected to do. They'll still learn under this. But what about these 20% of students that are square, that don't fit that? Do we just get a bigger hammer and hit harder, trying to force them through? Or do we instead design schools that adapt to meet the needs of students of all different sizes and shapes, which is what we should be focusing on? Because if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life thinking it's stupid. Education in our state should focus on individual children. What are their strengths? What are their interests? What are their passions? Not on fixing deficiencies. And that's what this whole program with Common Core, state testing, and remediation does. We no longer care about what makes this child unique and special and valuable. And that's a disservice. A school is not a business. And these people out there who are corporate reformers who believe you can run a school like a business have never run a school. A principal, I'm not a CEO. Students are not a product. My teachers are not assembly line workers. Like in the old Lucille Ball commercial or show where the product comes across, they add their pieces to it, that moves on, and then here comes the next one. Well, all we're doing with Common Core and some of these other things is speeding up that assembly line. And there's going to be a lot of wreckage at the end. What does college and career ready really mean? I think Linda talked about this, so I'll kind of skip through that. But here's where I think our focus needs to be. And this is philosophical in nature, but I think it's important for us to talk these issues. Right now, our schools are set up to create employees. We're trying to make square pegs or round pegs for round holes, the jobs that currently exist. We have no idea what jobs are going to be out there 10 years from now, let alone 20 years from now. So we may be training them for jobs that aren't there. What we need to be doing, again, is looking at those human traits, those human learning traits, to create students who have an entrepreneurial attitude. So instead of this narrow tunnel, this narrow pipeline, again, where we take all these individual differences and multiple intelligences and the diversity that makes our country great, the curiosity, the passion, and trying to funnel it into a very narrow tunnel like this to make everyone employable. Instead, we should be opening that up. And schooling should be about finding each child's unique talents and gifts and enhancing those talents so they can make as big a contribution as they can to our society. If we're not focused on developing each child and instead trying to standardize each child, we're doing the wrong thing. Yang Zhao is an author. Grew up in China, now speaks up a lot, wrote a book a few years ago called Catching Up or Leading the Way. It's funny if you read things about that are going on in China today. China is abandoning their test-centric education system. They just passed a whole set of reforms, one of which says no homework before grade 4. No after-school tutoring is allowed. Because what they understand is they may have high test scores, but they have students who lack creativity, who aren't innovative, who are so rote that they can't think outside that very narrow parameters. So they're looking to the United States and saying, how do we create innovators and entrepreneurs, the Bill Gates of the world? How do we do that in our education system? And they're going to the model we used to have and that made us great, and we're going to the model that failed them, that creates billions of people to fill a factory job. So we have a choice. We can destroy our strengths in order to catch others on test scores, or we can build on our strengths and remain a leader in innovation and creativity. The current push for more standardization, centralization, high-stakes testing, and test-based accountability is rushing us down the first path. What will truly keep America strong and prosperous is the other path, because it cherishes individual talents, cultivates creativity, celebrates diversity, and inspires curiosity. I want to end with one point. A lot of people have asked me why I do what I do, why I bother to drive down to the state capitol, as I have several times, why I write letters to the board, or letters to the editor, why I blog, I write articles routinely on there, why I speak to all sorts of parent groups about these issues, why I have such passion for these reforms and the things that are happening in our country. And my short answer to that is I must. Because I see these students every day. These students don't have a voice. They need someone who's willing to stand up and talk on their behalf. But it's not just the kids that are in our schools today or the ones that are coming up. It's also the students who've passed through our education system, an education system that failed them because it didn't recognize them as unique and special human beings. My brother is one of those individuals. Steve and I both went to Sand Springs High School. We grew up in an alcoholic household. For me, school was a refuge. I was good at school. I took all the tough courses. I liked taking tests because I did well at tests. I played basketball, played other sports. My brother, on the other hand, had a congenital heart issue, so he couldn't play sports. And he wasn't good at school either. And by about 7th grade, he'd become so disillusioned by the process of school. He was one of those kids who loved to fix things, to take things apart and work on them. He could visualize things much better than I ever could. I always admired how smart he was. He barely graduated high school. And if he had to take EOI graduation tests, and he failed one or two, he probably would just quit. Because that was his attitude about school. Now, whether his depression and anxiety caused his problems in education.
We're going to ask if
All right,
the
go ahead.
parents on hold.
Sorry?
You can hold on just a second. Our last presenter's doing his closing comments, and we'll go to you.
This would be great, thank you.
Please continue.
So what I was saying is whether his depression and anxiety, the angst that followed him throughout most of his life, caused his problems in school or were a manifestation of his experiences with school, I'll never know. But I know that those experiences followed him throughout his life. And he turned to alcohol, and he turned to drugs, like many people in our society do, because they can't cope with that constant sense that they're inferior, and with the pain of being told over and over again that you're not as good as someone else. And when we do that as schools, it is heartbreaking. My brother passed away last summer, and it was really hard. And so when I think back to Jenks Middle School, I have 100 Steves in my building. I have 100 kids, if not more, who walk into that building every day carrying a tremendous burden that life has given them. They don't like school. They're looking for someone who's going to be their advocate, who's going to stand up for them and say, I'm here for you, and I'm going to make this place safe and meaningful, and you've got people who care. And that's what our teachers do every single day. And to try and evaluate the success of a school based purely on standardized test scores is diminishing the profession of education. So what I would ask the representatives in here today is, as you go into this next legislative session and the years going on, And you have to make these tough decisions relative to students in public education. I want you to keep in mind and filter your decisions through this prism of kids like Steve. So if you have a question, do I support Common Core state standards? Do I support this or that initiative? I want you to ask yourself the simple question: is this going to help kids like Steve, or is it going to hurt kids like Steve? And if it's not going to help them, please don't do it.